Hello and welcome back to the Points lecture series on social issues. And in this chapter of social movements, we'll be talking about the last installment of youth movements in India and the characteristic features that led to these social movements. So, if you take a look at the growth of an agitation due to the youth unrest, so there are similar patterns across history, across geographies, across time periods when youth took to the roads and protested against the existing conditions. So, this existing conditions, the status quo, and the conditions that facilitated this status quo was dismantled by the agitation of youth across history. Now, if you take a look at certain common features, what are the different stages through which you witness the growth of these youth agitations into social movements? Firstly, there is this discontent stage where there is a growing frustration amongst the youth for not getting what they are supposedly uh, meant to get, and this existing conditions are actually frustrating them. This frustration will actually channelize into uh, a leader generally trying to capture that excitement amongst the youth, and certain proposals for action are debated within the youth. In the next stage, where it is called formalization stage in sociology, this is where you would see certain action points developed into programs. All the members would be mobilized and support is sought for the formalization of this particular program. So this is the second stage. The next stage is where you take the fight to the public. The next important thing that uh, this section of the society, that is the student section of the society, they take the onus upon them to create awareness amongst public. So they seek public support on the issue, and this is how they transform the movement, which is confined to a small set of frustrated students, into the mass public. Because even these movements, when they take the shape of the movements, it needs support from the public as well. So that is the next important phase, which is a prerequisite to be identified as a youth movement. The final stage is when the officials recognize that this growing discontentment is supposedly meant to be managed or negotiated with for peace and security of a region, for stability of a region. So, these are the various phases where youth take the initiative to come forward and address a particular social issue. It need not be just pertaining to students. If you take a look at history, most of the political movements have youth support, because when youth mobilize the energy that they have and channelize it towards a cause, across history, the result has always been positive. Most of the times, why would youth want to leave their work behind and come out into the society to take up a cause? Most of the times, the causes of youth unrest is probably because their needs are not being heard by the governments. There are no enough opportunities for employment and expressing their potential. A lot of economic difficulties are pertaining or sustaining in the society. And then if you take a look at the curriculum, there is absolutely no freedom to move beyond a rigid framework of education. There is absolutely no scope for co-curricular activities and personality development. So all these are the common causes that lead to youth unrest. So what are the remedies? Firstly, for uh, this youth unrest, the most effective one is to create channels for addressing the concerns of the leaders, and this requires nurturing leadership amongst the youth. Like in the case of college elections, formally inducing them into a democratic system is the need of the hour. Second thing is communication channels between the students and the teachers should be very open, strong, and responsive. That is the most important thing, responsive. If it is just a one way communication and if there is no element of trust involved, then it would not lead to an amicable solution. The next thing is economic difficulties, whether it is with respect to the costs involved in education or whether it is with respect to the kind of opportunities one has after finishing their education, those should be addressed as well. And of course, employment opportunities. When we say employment opportunities, we mean gainful employment. That is, if the citizens of the country or the students who graduated, if they feel that by taking up a employment opportunity, there is going to be certain amount of personal growth, either in terms of monetary purpose or in terms of the experience gain, then that sort of an employment is called gainful employment. If we don't create avenues for expressing the potential or growing in the career, then that is not a gainful employment. That is not speaking about the volume, or in fact the quality of the employment that is generated. Just to put things into context, a couple of years ago, when railways notified that there are 1 to 2 lakh uh, jobs, we have had 2.5 crore applications, and some of the candidates who have done their PhD, they have applied for some 10th class or probably graduate level posts. So this shows that the quality of employment in our country that is being generated is simply not sufficient to meet the demands of the growing young population. That is the reason why we say that if we don't address the demands of these youth, India is going to have a demographic disaster. Demographic disaster. It means that by 2047, it is expected that nearly 60% of the population will be in the age group of 15 to 55. That is working age population. And if you don't give them an opportunity to work, they become a liability. It is a demographic disaster. Where will the government feed all these mouths when they're ready to work and they don't have work to do? So this is the biggest challenge. So we're going to talk about the Gujarat agitation, which is a sort of an anti-reservation agitation in the post-independent India. In the previous video, we have seen how caste groups mobilize their resources and manpower and collectively negotiated for affirmative action. So this was seen in the case of Mandal Commission. So Mandal Commission actually was responsible behind the creation of the present structure of reservation for OBCs. So this particular agitation was an anti-reservation agitation. Let us have a look. So there was a commission called the Rani Commission, which is the basis for the reservation that was given in the state of Gujarat, where the quota was increased from 10% to 28% for socially and educationally backward classes. So, what started as a protest against this Rani Commission's recommendation, it was basically a anti-reservation agitation by students. Eventually, it took the shape of Hindu-Muslim conflict. So, it had various dimensions and manifestations. Like Hindu-Muslim conflict is one. Then you have the Dalit versus upper caste communal clashes. All this continued for nearly 2 months in the year 1985. Finally, the impact of this agitation was that the government had to, take a step back, probably review the reservation policy, and announce that it would rethink on the decision taken. So, such was the power of a student movement. If you have to take about another example, Navnirman Andalan, or the reinvention or reconstruction movement. Again, it's in Gujarat. It's a socio-political movement that happened even before this Gujarat agitation in 1974. So, students and middle class people, they were in a severe economic crisis. There was corruption across the institutions in the country. So, corruption, why does it happen generally? One, the value system. There is a erosion of values, especially in public domain. And secondly, institutional design. What do you mean by institutional design? Actually, there is absolutely no incentive to work honestly, and there is every incentive to be dishonest because the officials were not held accountable for whatever decisions they were taking. So corruption was rife, and economic crisis was taking new hit on the economic power or the purchasing power of the middle class and the lower classes. And students of the middle class were equally frustrated because they were not getting enough jobs. So back then, India was a closed economy. Unless and until the government notified new jobs, it would not be possible for them to gain enough employment. In such a scenario, this agitation was widespread in the state of Gujarat, and it is the only successful agitation in the history of post-independent India that resulted in a dissolution of the elected government of the state. So that was the power of the students. You can imagine. So it's a very important moment. It's called the Navnirman Andolan. So please remember that. So the second moment is the Assam movement, Assam Youth Movement. So what is this Assam Youth Movement? Let us have a look. This is during the time of Indira Gandhi. Recently in 2019, we have had the Citizenship Amendment Act, and this had a significant result in Assam's elections as well. So this is not a new issue. This has a certain history, and if you take a look at the background of this issue, the youth of Assam started this agitation in the year 1983-84. Yes, the same year India won the Cricket World Cup for the very first time. So what is the issue? There were certain refugees from East Bengal, or what we know today as Bangladesh. So the people of Assam, they felt very insecure about this influx of migrants, which almost subjugated their culture, and they felt historically Bengal did not get the kind of treatment it deserved, irrespective of the fact that Bengal was the nerve center of Indian nationalism right from 1900 to 1947, or even before that, to be very honest. It is the Bengali Renaissance that actually transformed the independence movement in our country. Despite this fact, the kind of resources allocated to the state, according to their own perception, is very low. And this spread over to Assam as well. They also felt very discriminated and neglected by the center. And that trend is not just true to Assam but all the northeast states. The kind of perception that these people hold back then was very much on the similar lines. So there were ethnic rivalries too. Assamese and non-Assamese, tribals and non-tribals. There was a constant state of conflict, and this proved to be a very fertile ground for student movements. And the most important student union is the ASU movement. So the success of this student community is that they even went to win the assembly elections and form the government. That was the first time in the history of the country that students became political rulers. However, things haven't changed. The people of the state still felt that feeling of neglect towards the state government, that is Assam people feeling neglected by the center, still continued, did not change. So, to counter this, the agitation took a bit of a violent form in the form of United Liberation Front of Assam. It came into existence. It not only challenged the state authority. So, what is its biggest threat is it turned out to be a threat for internal security. So it started extorting money from local businessmen at gunpoint. They even created a parallel government in the state. And the existing state government machinery was simply not a match for the kind of insurgency that Ulfa created. So the center removed the state government, and president's rule was set up because the constitutional machinery in the state was simply not functioning. It was in the year 1990 Operation Bajrang was created, and it was created to suppress the Ulfa movement. So the threat that they posed was they were not only a challenge to the internal security, they even had this secessionist tendencies to move away from Indian Union. So that was a very dangerous trend which needed to be curbed. And this operation turned out to be a successful one, and Ulfa's influence over this region subsequently reduced. The next one is yet another anti-reservation agitation that we're talking about, the Anti-Mundal Agitation. In the previous videos, we have talked about the Mundal Commission, and in this Mundal Commission, it was suggested that 27% of reservation be given to the other backward classes in central government jobs. So, in the year 1990, the Janata government, which is a minority government, which is a very short-lived government, they went on to accept this Mandal Commission report of giving 27% jobs to the OBCs. So it motivated a movement against the government to show that they were not happy with the decision taken. So it started in Delhi and spread to various other North Indian states where young people set themselves on fire as a mark of protest. So there were certain culturally unique features of the movement. So this riots are actually uh, marked by bunds as in total shutdown of the region as a version of a strike. Then you also have hartals where the government functionaries and the services were interrupted as a mark of protest. Similarly, there were dharnas where people together walked in support of the anti-agitation movement and expressed their dissent about the decision. So we also had certain violent events like public property getting destroyed, looting happened, and this was a significant feature not just in one particular area but entire North Indian belt. This in varying intensities and capacities. So this was the movement. What was the fallout or the impact of this movement? There was little success because after the 1992 Indira Sawhney judgment, the government went ahead with the implementation of this OBC reservation. The takeaway from this entire discussion is to identify what factors would lead to uh, agitational activities by young people. So there are certain traits. These people are isolated or they come from a very dissatisfied state of living. They are not really interested in studies or they don't have many avenues for expressing their potential. Then again, someone who lack intimate ties with their families tend to become antisocial elements, and marginalized youth eventually they feel so insecure and resentful that they get radicalized. So this is how radicalization happens, especially with the fundamentalist forces. The overall takeaway is this: if we don't give youth our energy and channels to express their potential and grow in their personal life, that frustration builds up, which eventually leads to social unrest. So, this is the final dimension that we have discussed in the social moments chapter. We will be concluding here. I really hope that you like this lecture and thanks for watching this till now.